4 years ago, Vladimir Putin sent his army into Ukraine with the intention of taking Kyiv in 3 days. Surely, many in the Kremlin were skeptical of the lightning operation, but didn't tell Putin, for fear that speaking out against him might get them thrown into the gulag. But not even in their worst nightmares did they imagine that the invasion would become so entrenched and push the Russian economy to the brink. Russia isn't about to collapse, that much is clear. But living conditions for Russians have deteriorated significantly, and the crisis is particularly concerning in the industrial sector.
Russia plans bankruptcy moratorium to shield struggling steelmakers. The company's debt exceeds 250 billion rubles, while its net loss in the first half of 2025 jumped 143% year-on-year to 40.5 billion rubles, the worst result since 2015. Severstal, which accounts for about 14% of Russia's steel output, has also sounded the alarm.
Yes, you heard correctly. The metal industry is in the red, and in the midst of a war. And this is not an isolated case. According to official data from Rosstat, by mid-2025, steel production had plummeted by 10% compared to the previous year. Again, less steel is being produced in the midst of a war, precisely when it's needed most. And just as the economy was going through its worst moment since the start of the war, a guardian angel appeared to Putin. Can you guess who we're talking about? Exactly, the one from China.
December 3rd, 2025. Russia strengthens financial ties to China with first renminbi bond. The country's $3 billion dim sum bond will help finance the war in Ukraine and could lead to many more.
Mind you, we're not just talking about economic aid. Many military analysts, and even Volodymyr Zelensky himself, are warning that China's presence is becoming increasingly noticeable on the battlefield, which is quite surprising. I mean, China has always collaborated with Russia, but until now it has tried to keep things as low-key as possible, at least in public. But apparently, things have changed. So the questions are clear. Is Xi Jinping really going to bail out the Russian economy? Exactly what role is he playing in the war in Ukraine? Will we see these two countries forge even closer ties? Today we'll answer all these questions, but first, here's another piece of information. Imagine this for a second. You lose your laptop, or your account gets compromised. Photos, documents, personal files, gone. Or worse, in someone else's hands. It sounds extreme, but it happens more often than we think. And most people only realize how exposed their data is when it's already too late. The truth is, most of us have traded privacy for convenience without even realizing it. But don't worry, there is a solution: Proton. Proton brings together two essential tools, Proton Mail and Proton Drive, under a single account. That means your emails and your files are not only in one place, but also fully protected with end-to-end encryption. And here's the best part, not even Proton itself can access your data, unlike Google or Microsoft. You are the only one in control. With Proton Mail, your inbox becomes a lot safer and cleaner. It actively blocks phishing attempts, filters out spam, and even lets you create email aliases, so you can sign up for services without exposing your real address. And then there's Proton Drive. This is where things get really interesting. You can store documents, photos, or anything important completely encrypted, whether it's personal files, work documents, or even sensitive information like contracts or budgets. Everything stays private. You can also share files securely, using passwords or expiring links, and even collaborate on documents, without worrying about your data being scanned, sold, or used to train AI models. And honestly, that's the big difference. Unlike big tech platforms, Proton doesn't rely on advertising or data collection. Your emails and files are yours, period. Everything stays organized, synced across your devices, and easy to access without giving up your privacy. So if there's one takeaway here, it's this: take control of your digital life. And you want to know the best part? Using Proton Drive and Proton Mail is free. You only pay if you want a more advanced plan, such as more storage, so you don't need to spend money to have a secure email or store your data safely and privately. You can protect yourself right now using the QR code on screen or the link in the description. When the invasion of Ukraine began, one thing that really caught people's attention was that the Russian economy started to grow. Technically, GDP was growing, not because the economy was as resilient as Putin claims, but because GDP doesn't care whether you produce houses or missiles. In fact, if you build a house and a missile, then fire the missile at the house, in the national accounts, you'll have a missile and a house appearing in the GDP. Even though in reality, what you actually have is nothing but a pile of rubble. If you add to this the fact that the financial sector is more heavily manipulated than a geisha with all the capital controls imposed on the ruble, then the truth is that the positive economic data from the start of the war ceased to be so surprising. But the situation is even worse, because even with a GDP inflated by military production, the truth is that this sector isn't exactly in a position to set off fireworks. Since 2025, production at arms factories has been in decline, or at the very least has completely stagnated. That said, there is one major exception: drones, but we'll talk more about that later. Want another surprising fact? According to the 2026 budget, military spending will be lower than in 2025. And it's not because Putin has already won the war and sees no need to bet bigger. In fact, casualties are rising exponentially, already exceeding 1 million soldiers. And clearly, it's not because ammunition depots are overflowing and there's no need to manufacture more, quite the opposite.
Defense spending functions like a disposable goods economy. Factories operate at full capacity, workers earn wages, and demand for inputs surges, but the output is designed to vanish almost immediately.
If military spending is set to decrease, it's simply because the Russian economy can't take any more, and Putin doesn't dare cross certain red lines that would put the country into full-scale war economy mode. Because here's the thing, since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, military spending has risen from 20% to 40% of the federal budget. That's a lot, though there's still room to tighten the belt. The problem? Well, that would mean completely destroying the civilian economy and sparking a wave of protests. So, on the one hand, there's no political will to cut civilian spending like hospitals and roads. But on the other hand, debt is eating up an ever larger chunk of the total budget, so there's no choice but to cut military spending. But couldn't the Kremlin just take on more debt? Well, yes, in part, though that would be a short-term fix with long-term consequences. Keep in mind that in 2021, debt interest accounted for 4.4% of the public budget. These days, that figure stands at 8.8%, more than all spending on healthcare and education combined. The fact is, the deficit is completely out of control. The 2025 budget projected that the Russian government would spend 1.7 trillion rubles more than it would collect. However, it ended up being 5.7 trillion, or 2.5% of GDP. And yes, I know that 2.5% doesn't sound too high. In fact, many European countries are spending much more. However, Russia has to pay higher interest rates on its public debt. It has few friends willing to finance its battles, and let's be clear, buying a Lamborghini isn't the same when you're rich as when you're making €1,000 a month. Given this, you now have the first key factor to understanding the role China is playing in this whole story: financing and helping to sustain a military industry teetering on the brink. But there's still a second key factor. You see, budget problems aren't the only reason Russian factories are struggling to keep up. The other major problem is the lack of supplies due to international sanctions. To give you an idea, one KH-101 cruise missile requires more than 50 parts that aren't manufactured in Russia, parts that cannot currently enter the country, at least not legally. Of course, Putin is trying to build up his own domestic industry, but so far it hasn't been very successful.
For many production goals, they have already had to abandon some of the requirements because there are no domestic alternatives. In some cases, Chinese goods are simply labeled as Russian to meet the targets.
The Russian defense minister, who is, incidentally, an economist, has tried to calm the waters by saying not to worry, that a Russian Silicon Valley will emerge very soon as a result of all the demand driven by the war in Ukraine. He cites the US as an example, where many tech companies became the giants they are today thanks to demand from the military sector. The problem? Well, Russia is not the United States. Its market is nowhere near as competitive. And most importantly, Russian companies cannot even access the international market to purchase supplies and ramp up their production. This is crucial. Russia doesn't just need revenue. Without suppliers to buy equipment from, any amount of money is useless. And this is where China comes in, the only country that can circumvent sanctions to supply equipment to Russia on a large scale. In 2023, China supplied 90% of the microelectronics products imported into the country. Of course, Xi Jinping says these goods have nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, that they're only for civilian applications. But let's see. Among China's shipments, we can find items like $5 billion worth of microchips for missiles and fighter jets, or $100 million worth of piezoelectric crystals, which are used in military equipment such as radar systems. Can those be used in the civilian sector? Well, technically, yes, of course they can, but they aren't designed for that. Furthermore, we have much more evidence. You only need to look at the one sector where Russia is ramping up its production: drones.
Chinese manufacturers provide them with hardware, electronics, navigation, optical and telemetry systems, engines, microcircuits, processor modules, antenna systems, and control boards and navigation systems. They use so-called shell companies, change names, and do everything to avoid being subject to export controls and sanctions for their activities.
At the start of the war, Ukraine surprised everyone with its use of drones, but after 4 years, the Russians have stepped up their game. These days, Ukraine manufactures around 100 long-range drones a day. Russia, 300. A figure that doubled in just 1 year. This is key because if the war in Ukraine has taught us anything, it's that drones have forever changed the rules of the game on the battlefield. And right now, even Zelensky himself admits that the capabilities of Russian drones are evolving at breakneck speed.
We are spending a lot of money. We are spending more today than we planned because everyone is developing. The Russians are developing, and our new technologies are emerging.
According to Putin and his team, all of this is due to the immense strength of the Russian economy, particularly special economic zones like Alabuga, where some of the country's most advanced drones are being manufactured. Even so, according to various investigations, these regions are not a domestic powerhouse. Rather, they are factories where foreign drones are assembled, mainly from China and Iran. In fact, OSINT researchers have traced up to 41 critical components that come directly from the Asian giant. But it doesn't end there. Engines from the Chinese company Zhuhang Aviation have been found in Russian-made drones. And we know that this company shipped $60 million worth of goods to Russia between 2022 and 2024. And the same could be said of other components such as lithium batteries, microchips, and even drone propellers. Now, does this mean that Xi Jinping has personally ordered Chinese companies to send these military supplies to Russia? Well, probably not. Most likely, these companies are doing business on their own. What's more, China has tightened its export controls in recent years. For example, by limiting shipments of drone motors with more than 16 kilowatts of power. To put that in context, that's half the power used by most drones on the battlefield. At this point, we need to make one thing very clear. We don't know to what extent the Chinese government is supporting Vladimir Putin, but what we do know is that trade relations between these two countries aren't as friendly as they seem at first glance. The Chinese are doing business with the Russian military, but for now, everything points to this being a business matter, rather than that China is financing Putin's crusade out of ideological affinity or anything of that nature. China is exporting sanctioned goods, but it's selling them for 85% more. If they were really such good friends, wouldn't it make sense for them to sell them cheaper, just like Russia used to do with Cuba? Would you like a more specific example? Take industrial bearings, a key component in many industries, including military manufacturing. In 2024, Russia imported $26 million worth of these parts, 75% more than the previous year. However, the number of parts entering the country fell by 15%. If fewer parts are imported, but spending increases, obviously each part has become much more expensive. In this case, the price doubled during the war so far. And this only happened with exports to Russia. Other countries continued to purchase these bearings at a normal price. What's more, although China has protested the sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, the fact is that it has complied with them.
In response to those sanctions, Chinese state-owned companies suspended several purchases of Russian oil, turning to other regions for supplies. Earlier in October, Unipec, a major Chinese oil trader, likewise paused shipments of Russian oil following similar UK sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil.
What do we mean by all this? Well, for now, it doesn't seem like China intends to bail out the Russian economy. Putin needs two things: money and critical supplies. The Asian giant is helping out a bit with the latter, but it's not giving him anything for free. Quite the opposite. And keep one thing in mind. China has been sending these crucial supplies for years, and yet Russia's industrial production has stagnated. As for drones, the only sector where Russia is improving its numbers year after year, there's no evidence that the Chinese government is actively helping, at least not on a large scale. What's more, trade relations between these two countries aren't exactly at their best right now either. China's exports to Russia have been in the red almost every month since 2024. To give you an idea, the only month in which exports grew compared to the previous year was February 2025. Some exports, such as automobiles, have fallen by 50%. But it's not just about Chinese exports. Russia's exports to the Asian giant are also in the doldrums. For example, oil exports have plummeted by 20%, and coal by another 30%. And I know what many of you are thinking. Russia is at war. It's normal for demand for many goods like cars to drop. This doesn't mean trade relations have worsened. Well, yes, you'd be right, if it weren't for the fact that exports came to a screeching halt after Russia imposed brutal tariffs on Chinese vehicles. Well, technically, they're not tariffs, but recycling fees. But let's be real. In practice, they're just your typical old-school tariffs. Precisely what you do to your number one ally when you need their help the most. Now, we're not saying that Xi Jinping isn't cooperating with Putin at all.
China provides intelligence to Russia on Ukraine targets, Ukrainian intelligence says.
It's clear that in recent months, Chinese intelligence has been helping Russia locate targets, and is likely also supplying critical technology to strike them. On top of that, according to Ukrainian intelligence, China has reportedly provided Russia with $10 billion to manufacture Oreshnik missiles, which fly at over 12,000 kilometers per hour. In other words, China is indeed playing a significant role, but not in the Russian economy, rather on the battlefield. Instead of a major macroeconomic bailout or a genuine trade alliance, we're seeing surgical interventions that don't require much effort on China's part either. Remember the yuan-denominated bond we talked about at the beginning of this video? Well, it's a similar story. It's not particularly favorable for Russia, nor does it require any effort on China's part. But why are these interventions increasing right now? Well, we can't say for sure, but there's one very simple explanation. It's because Russia is at its weakest point since the war began. In other words, this is when China has the most leverage to negotiate. In any case, having reached this point, now it's your turn. Did you know the state of the Russian industrial sector? Do you think China is sending so many drone parts on Xi Jinping's orders, or are there simply Chinese companies that have seen an opportunity to do business? Do you think it's possible that China will double down on its economic support for Putin? You can leave your answers in the comments. Don't forget that here on Visual Economic, we release new videos every week, so subscribe if you haven't already to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. As always, thank you so very much for watching. Take care. I'll see you next time.